Well, good morning and welcome everybody. I'm Melissa Riley, Vice President of Convention Sales and Services with Destination DC, and thrilled to have you join us this morning for our Convention Sales and Services Post-Mom webinar. Our Marketing Outlook meeting happened just a few weeks ago, and so much still to be told as we look forward to the future and engaging convention sales and services and our member community in what the future holds. So I would like to kick it over to Elliot Ferguson, our President and CEO, to say a few introduction words and welcome the group, and then we'll dive into some great data and resources moving forward. Elliot?
Thank you, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you again. I actually put on a suit, a 100% suit today versus just a jacket for the Zoom. We're pleased to be here after the Marketing Outlook meeting, and equally as much, I see a lot of people coming into the room to give you all an opportunity to do your follow-up and ask questions and to learn a little bit more about what's happening in the space of convention sales and services. And as I mentioned at Marketing Outlook meeting, we're doing the same thing for each department. I know that Teresa's done it for tourism, sports, and visitor services. So this is really an opportunity for you all to engage and ask questions and understand how to get a bigger return on your investment as members of Destination DC. Now, I think the most telling thing for us is what happened last week during IMEX, be it the show itself or the Brand USA, Meetings Mean Business Coalition, Tourism Diversity Matters, the CEO executive meetings, all the things in which we attended in addition to IMEX. Was an opportunity for us to really engage and get back at doing what we do best, which is promoting our destination. But I think the most compelling comment, which ties into something that I said during the Marketing Outlook meeting, is that being in the DC booth makes a huge difference in terms of those that are coming and looking at ways of doing business in Washington, DC. The booth was amazing, if I must say so myself. So thanks to Melissa and our marketing and communications team for putting together an impressive booth for us. But not only that, but it was a busy booth in terms of the number of customers that were coming in and spending time with us. So as we're talking about our priorities, and Bill and Melissa and Diana are sharing with you how we are focusing on selling our destination in 2023 and beyond, there are a lot of things in which you all should be asking yourselves as we move forward. What's my stake in the game? How can I get a bigger return on investment? And how should I interact with you all as you are going about doing this business domestically and internationally? Because I know Tara Miller is on the call as well and focusing on the MICE market. So thank you all for your time. I will mute myself and I will turn off my camera, but I'll be listening because I know that Vicki with MMGY and others will be sharing some compelling information with you. So thanks again for your membership, your partnership. Feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have any questions. But you don't need me because you've got a dynamic team with the leadership that's on this call. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Melissa, and have a fantastic forum.
Thank you, Elliot. And we will always need you. Just remember that. It is the end of the year review season after all. So as Elliot indicated, we had an incredible IMEX forum last week. There was so much activity, and it's truly our greatest presence and our greatest investment that we do all year long. IMEX is often the kickoff to a year, and it gives us a great temperature check on what the customers are feeling for the upcoming year. But we don't just make our decisions and our strategies based on gut feelings and what we see and witness on a trade show floor. We are certainly a data-driven industry. As we work with our member community, this is more important as we move forward. So today's format is going to be a little bit different. We are going to actually give you some really good statistics and data on what the future looks like in this kind of post-COVID coming out of recovery mode, and what you can expect from our planner community and from our attendee community. So we partnered with MMGY this past year in 2022 to do some extensive survey of traveler sentiments in the meetings and convention space. So I'm thrilled that we're joined today by Vicki Allen. And Vicki represents MMGY, as I had indicated, who, if you're not familiar, is a global network of research and data product and services exclusively serving the hospitality, travel, and tourism industries. And so they do some really extensive customer sentiment on the leisure side. And we're thrilled this year to get some meeting and attendee data as well. And then after Vicki presents some really interesting statistics moving forward, I'm going to turn it over to our leaders within the Convention Sales and Services Department, Bill, Diana, and Tara, who I will introduce formally a little bit later, talking about how sales, services, and the international marketplace are responding to this traveler sentiment and how we're creating strategies around that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce formally Vicki Allen. So Vicki is actually essential to the day-to-day management of accounts, including CVBs in particular. She actually has firsthand experience previously working with Visit Florida, and she constructs quantitative analysis highlighting trends to grow visitation, spending, and market share, and is responsible for the data input, analysis, and delivery of all client reports. So she kind of does this roadshow quite often with some of our other CVB communities, but we're really excited to have her today. So Vicki, without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Sorry, we were coordinating meeting, but thank you so much for that great introduction, Melissa. Yes, so I'm excited to share this data with you. If you could pull that up and we could start looking at the presentation. So MMGY Travel Intelligence, we started this study in 2021, actually, where we surveyed both meeting attendees and planners once a quarter to get their gauge on different industries. Initially, it was mostly about COVID, but now it's really evolved. So go to the next slide and I'll talk about the methodology. So this is a quarterly survey. We survey nearly 1,000 meeting attendees. These are those who say they've traveled more than 50 miles from home for a business conference, leisure or business convention, large corporate meeting or trade show at least once in the past 3 years. So the data that I'm going to talk about today was distinctly collected at the end of July, first part of August. All right, and then for our meeting planners, the next slide, please. We surveyed about 381 planning professionals, and they defined their role as anything from a corporate meeting professional, association meeting professional, independent third party, and so forth. And they had to have planned at least one meeting with more than 100 attendees during the past 5 years. And again, this data was collected in roughly the same time period. So let's look at the results. Next slide. So a third of planners are extremely optimistic about the outlook for the meetings, conference, and convention industry in the next 12 months. And you can see from the first wave of 2022, it was a little bit lower, but moving forward, people continue to grow in confidence. Next slide. So the percent of respondents who said the politics of the host destination play a role in the decision to plan or attend an event. Unfortunately, just the situation on the ground the past 2 years is politics has come more and more part of the conversation and looking at a variety of destinations. So 41% of planners said they look at that. To attendees, it's much more important, 48%. Next slide. So of prospective event attendees, 56% said they're likely to extend their business trip in the next 12 months for leisure purposes. This has increased, and I think as Zoom and lockdowns have blended that kind of home and business and personal, people are trying to look at their travel differently and thinking, you know, how can I extend my time in a destination beyond just the meeting, get the most out of that trip. Next slide, please. And specifically, since DC is a sponsor, they asked this question specifically for the DC area, the likelihood if they were to extend their trip for leisure purposes, if they attended a meeting or convention in DC. And you can see here about 58% said they are likely or extremely likely to extend their trip for leisure in the DC area. Next slide. So the percent of those who say their perception of a host destination's environmental responsibility impact their decision to plan or attend an event. So 48% of attendees say the environmental responsibility of a destination is really important to them, and 43% of planners. This is coming up more and more, the environmental impact. I think especially younger generations, that they're much more conscious of the environmental impact. They want to be sustainable and environmentally responsible, and they want to go to places that support that. Next slide. So now we're going to look particularly at the proprietary questions Destination DC asked. Next slide. All right, so here is the planner's likelihood to plan a meeting in Washington, DC in the next 24 months. And you can see here it really jumped in wave 2 and wave 3. I think people are just getting more and more comfortable going out, having these experiences. They're hearing from other planners. Things are going great. So it's really good for the Destination DC area. Next slide. And you can see here attendees' likelihood to attend a meeting in Washington, DC is also up. About half said they're either likely or extremely likely to attend a meeting, conference, or convention in the DC area in the next 24 months. And here's how it compares. You can see the blue is the planners and the purple is the attendees. So planners are very comfortable. They're going back to the same places they already had successful meetings. They're feeling comfortable. Attendees just in general, it isn't just DC, they're just feeling a bit more tentative in going out. I think everyone's been so comfortable at home. We were talking right before the presentation started about Netflix and chill. I think it's just taking, for some people, a little bit more push to get them outside of their house to attend a meeting. The draw has to be much more compelling. Next slide, please. So for planners, we ask them to rank the influence of each experience to return to a previous book destination, of what is extremely influential as a 5 all the way to 1 as not influential. So the top 2 things are the hotel experience they had at the destination and the overall cost of producing the previous meeting. Those are the top things that are very influential to going back to a previous book destination. You know, other elements of success, the number of attendees at the previous meeting, the convention center experience, followed by destination attractions, and the ease of booking quality speakers and VIPs. And this is much lower on the list. So next slide. And then this is for the attendees, the ranking, which influences their experience to return to the destination as what's most influential to least influential. So the overall cost to attend, no surprise, inclusive of transportation, hotels, meals, etc. That number ranked as 5, extremely influential. Destination attractions, so they want to see what else is out there when they're not in the meeting. The quality of speakers and VIPs at the meeting, obviously it's the ability to connect with other people. Hotel experience in the destination, the convention center experience in the destination, and the content of the previous meeting. So I think that's about it. That was a quick and dirty rundown, but hopefully you found that informative.
Thank you so much, Vicki. You know, as Senior Research Account Manager with MMGY, I know that you see a lot of what's happening throughout the landscape, and we find it so valuable to be able to really understand what's happening, not just nationally and globally, but what's really happening in our market. So we really appreciate our partnership, and you know, the Washington, DC specific questions as well really help us create that strategy. Many of you in our member community know of our Connected campaign, and our Connected campaign exists with 3 pillars, really. It's Connected Capital, which is our intellectual capital. So it's very fascinating to see the difference between the planner community and the attendee community and what they find valuable in content. And then, of course, there's Connected Campus, expanding our footprint to include localized event spaces. And then what we launched within the last couple of years, Connected Community, which supports our sustainability efforts, which, you know, obviously are quite on the rise in terms of needs and wants from our community as well. We recently launched, based off of a planner discussion group that we had recently, Connected Meet with Purpose. And that really looks at some of that political conversation that we have going on, both social and economic challenges that we're facing as a nation. And Connected Meet with Purpose looks at both, you know, deciding between your family and work, deciding between whether you want to support social issues or not. So we're going to dive into all of this now. So again, thank you, Vicki, for setting the stage and delivering the data that helps inform our strategies for the future. So I've enlisted our great team in convention sales and services, starting with Bill Adams, who's our Director of Convention Sales. Also have with us Diana Waldrop, Director of Convention Services. And then Tara Miller, who's our International Account Director, focusing on meetings that rotate globally. And I'm going to address a few questions, some of the key points that really stood out in the data. And then each are going to, you know, take a point of view from their perspective and how they engage with our community. So Vicki kicked us off talking about optimism, which is great, because then she followed up with politics, which kind of goes downhill a little bit. So let's start on the bright spot. So in looking at the data, 74% of meeting planners are optimistic. And this is a meeting planner perspective, and I'll be very deliberate about which audience we're looking at here. So the meeting planners are optimistic for the next 12 months, and with nearly a third of them being extremely optimistic about coming out of a pandemic and getting through the recovery mode into some normalcy. So this was obviously done a few months ago, and curious as to whether you're seeing this optimism continue, if things are leveling out, or what the future holds. So Diana, I'll start with you from a convention services point of view, and understand what you're seeing within our planner and attendee community.
Great, absolutely. So we're seeing definite groups that have improved their outlook since last year. At the end of last year, groups were anticipating about 52% of their normal attendance for their upcoming meetings this year. So that outlook has increased to actually 84%, and some are even expecting 2019 numbers. So we have to remember most of these groups had their first live meeting in 2022 after 2 years of canceled meetings or virtual meetings. So they are expecting 2023 numbers to be better, and actually they're hoping 2024 to be back to normal. And if I could just share a quick example, in July, we had Otakon, one of our favorite annuals here in DC. Their pre-pandemic attendance was 23,000. So this year they're being conservative, they're expecting 20,000 attendees. They had a record attendance of 40,036 attendees. So it blew everything out of the water, the highest attendance that building has ever seen. So it's great. So we're starting to see things rebound, and it's making planners more confident about what they're doing and engaging their attendees.
Yeah, we learned a long time ago, hope is not a strategy, although we depended on it a lot during COVID. So it's nice to see the actual numbers coming through. And what I think remains to be seen is whether this is just the fanfare, no pun intended with Otakon, but coming out of the pandemic, are they just anxious to meet again, or is this something that will sustain for the future? So Bill, turning it over to you on the domestic sales front, what are you seeing in terms of bookings for the future and what that optimism looks like?
Thank you, Melissa. Yes, we are hearing that planners are indeed optimistic about the next 12 months. Small meetings have sort of carried the recovery, but we're finally starting to see some conversion for the larger meetings. Obviously, as we've been talking about for a few months now, we're also seeing the return to short-term corporate demand, which is always phenomenal and a welcome sight. But the Smith Travel Research gives us data that shows that DC's ADR is 5% higher than 2019 numbers. Great number there. This coupled with general inflation is cause for concern, but overall, we are seeing a return to pre-pandemic numbers, which we are all welcomed.
Yeah, the rate improvement is a blessing and a curse, depending on who you're talking to. So Tara, from the international standpoint, you know, we've heard repeated over and over again that international travel won't return until 24, 25. So what are you seeing on that global landscape?
Yeah, Melissa. So I think to start, we have to remind ourselves that the US borders opened in November, but the restrictions on needing a negative COVID test were only released in June of 2020. So we're 4 months into people feeling comfortable about traveling for business and coming into the US without that restriction of needing a COVID test. So I think that there is optimism, and the international association community that we're hearing from, they are definitely planning in 2023 for in-person congresses first. So they're requiring and mandating that speakers or abstracts are all presented in person, which obviously will help attendance now that they feel confident with that. And then later, if for some reason it seems like the travel is not feasible, they will add a virtual option or a digital add-on after the conference. So for the International Association community, it's reassuring to hear for 2023, they're at least planning for in-person first versus this virtual and hybrid conference. And then I think for the corporate sector, what I'm most encouraged by recently is we're seeing a lot more of these global all-staff meetings or these global partner summits. And so up into 2022, a lot of those were regionalized for, you know, America, EMEA, Asia Pacific. But based on the RFPs that we're getting of all sizes, small and large, there's definitely an uptick in bringing all these global communities, whether it's a global staff conference or a global partner summit in person. So the optimism is shared in the international market too.
Great. Well, actually, you set up and provided a great segue into my next question, which is looking at, I think from the planner perspective, and this is where we see a big variance between planner and attendee, is, you know, hybrid and virtual on the planner side have been dirty words recently, right? They don't want to plan it. It is incredibly difficult to produce a hybrid and or full virtual because you are basically doing two events simultaneously. You are capturing and delivering content at the same time as planning a live in real life meeting. However, from the attendee perspective, the data is a little bit different. And 41% say that they would prefer in-person meetings, but there's a strong case for 36% preference being hybrid meetings, and 1 in 4 say they still expect to see virtual as a main functionality of events. So Tara, I'm going to continue with you. How do you position that on the international front? Obviously, as visa issues and so forth continue to be a challenge, I would imagine that we'll see, you know, that virtual and hybrid demands from the attendee perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really depends on the specific segment, association versus corporate, and the nature of the meetings and what people feel like is worthwhile to attend in person. So one of the industry articles that we were recently encouraged by is a stat that when conference organizers are building in peer-to-peer interaction or these small 2 to 4 people roundtable discussions in conferences, that 63% more participants that participated in those interactions formed long-term collaborations after the conference. And so I think that is a justification for this in-person, is this peer-to-peer interaction. So you mentioned earlier our connected campaign, a lot of that touches into that interaction. So I think that's a talking point that we're stressing for more so the association and scientific communities. Now for corporate, some of the stats that I recently saw with this retreat style meeting that obviously cannot be duplicated online. This is mostly hotel only business or smaller groups, but very important and for the international market, we see as an opportunity to have short-term impact is in 2023, 66% of events will require air travel for some attendees. This is of internal meetings. This is evidenced by companies' post-pandemic commitment to internal meetings. So 66% of those type of meetings will require air travel. 40% will be in a city away from the corporate headquarters. So I think DC has some multiple benefits with, we have a lot of headquarters here, but we also have a lot of global companies that have a US office here, so we can tap into that. And then 45% will include overnight accommodations. So for the international meetings, targeting those retreat style meetings or C-level summits, incentive travel, the things that can't be replicated online in markets that may not require visa, that would be part of our visa waiver program, 40 countries, that's what we're targeting.
Awesome, great. Some fascinating statistics. Thank you for sharing those. So Diana, moving back over to you, we have seen over the past couple of years, some of our venues, some of our member community are platforms that help produce virtual and hybrid events. So what are you seeing firsthand from our customers as they're now actually, planning and actualizing their events in DC?
They definitely, after talking to a bunch of planners this year, planners do prefer in-person meetings and this year, and actually have been excited to plan them again. So initially hybrid options had to be considered for this year, but planners are really minimizing this option. So as you said earlier, planning an in-person event and a virtual meeting is really hard and it's not preferred. So customers are now recording sessions and showing them after the meeting in a fully virtual space. So instead of hybrid, kind of creating a FOMO, if you will. So attendees want to come in person instead of just catching it virtually. And also planners, again, trying to engage, they're slowly beginning to offer more opportunities for attendees to network in person, as well as opportunities for them to actually get together and make a difference in the city they're in by offering corporate social responsibility options, which have gone away for a few years. So we're really seeing a big push for that right now.
Awesome. And Bill, we hear a lot these days about the term bleisure, which again is a word we love to hate. I've also heard workcation out there. So as people are, being very intentional about where and what they participate in, what are you seeing from the domestic side in terms of desirability to be in real life or virtual?
Yeah, and I like the term real life because although we all work in the hospitality industry, when something like a pandemic hits, we have to make real life decisions. And sometimes those decisions include cutting the family vacation. Many people had to forego that family vacation or a vacation of on any level for many years. My house is no different. Business events often is the first opportunity for any person in the household to travel. Many attendees have opted to use that opportunity to combine business and leisure, thus bleisure. Travel by extending their stay on either end, and also then bring their families along to those business events. Planners can use this opportunity to work with their destination experts like us to highlight those parts of the destinations that will be beneficial to both the meeting planner for the core business needs, and then attractive for an attractive leisure experience after the work of the day is done. So I think that's a welcome sign for destinations, and I think it provides a bit of a healing for us as well. So,
yeah, that's the one thing I did not cut was my vacation budget. And Bill, you had talked about some statistics from Smith Travel Research in the last point. And I think what's important to know is as we look at the data, that there's strong evidence on the shoulder nights to support that bleisure activity is happening in Washington, D.C. And so we'll continue to create strategies around that moving forward. And in terms of, that networking and peer-to-peer engagement that Diana and Tara both touched on, it's we've yet to figure out how to recreate networking in a virtual space, and it just hasn't been done successfully. The virtual happy hour is a thing of the past, and that face-to-face engagement cannot be replicated in this space at all. So look forward to moving forward with elements of that in the future. So moving on to the attendee perspective again, and looking at what some of their decisions influencing travel and decisions to attend certain events. Bill touched on this, and how do you combine, how do you maximize your time? But coming out of the recovery phase, we're looking still at COVID concerns. We have Infectious Diseases Society of America and in-house right now. Today's their first day for a citywide that Diana is so beautifully managing, but they're still requiring masks in the convention center as they are infectious disease doctors. And so COVID is still very relevant to a lot of our groups, especially being such a strong medical market. We are also faced with technology as a disruptor as well. We just had a long conversation about virtual and hybrid. Corporate travel budgets, well, we're seeing the short-term demand that Bill referenced return in terms of the corporate marketplace. What does that look like? Because we know how fickle the corporate market can be, and how quickly they decide to have an event or to not have an event and cut the budget. And then, of course, inflation, cost of travel that we're both, or all of us are encountering on a both personal and professional level, and then disruptions, travel disruptions that Tara's touched on quite a bit. So of these, what do you see as most dominant, and where do they all play into decision-making and factors of destinations in the future? And Bill, I'll let you kick back off with this one again.
Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting question, especially when you use the word dominant, because I don't know that there is any one of these factors that is dominant. In fact, I think it's all of the above. At any time, any one or any combination of these factors has an impact on travel. I feel like everything has an impact on travel, to be totally honest with you. And while we see planners' apprehension about COVID diminishing somewhat, as we've talked about, there is evidence that their attendees are still not quite there. Couple that with rising inflation, staffing shortages, as you mentioned, shrinking travel budgets, as you've mentioned, the impact on 2023 has the potential to be profound. But as a community, we are nothing if not resilient. So I know we'll find a way to make it happen for business events.
Absolutely. And Diana, on that firsthand account, what are you seeing?
Definitely. So a big pain point right now for a lot of these planners is the corporate travel budgets have been cut over the past 2 years. So trying to get that rebuilt and how that affects them, in the past, an exhibiting company would have a big booth and send a lot of people. This year, the booth sizes are smaller. They're sending some people, not obviously as many, and they're hoping in 2023 that it's going to go back. They'll see their bigger booths. So that is affecting their bottom line. So that's the biggest pain point that we're seeing right now with planners.
Yeah, we can certainly empathize with that. At IMEX, we returned to a bigger booth than we had last year. And, it was nerve-wracking to know whether it was going to pay off with, ROI at the end, and it certainly did. So, Tara, I think you probably agree with both Bill and Diana, but have a different perspective on where your priority from the international standpoint lands.
Yes. So I had to do the eye patches just to cover what keeps us up at night lately are the things that we're trying to proactively address for clients. But I think the thing that I would focus on is the travel disruptions. Many of us probably saw all of the thousands of luggage that was in Frankfurt, London Heathrow. And so it just causes this concern for attendees, like, is it worth traveling? So first, some of these international markets may take 400 days to get a visa interview scheduled to come to the US if they want to attend something. And then they have the fear of flight cancellations or lost luggage if they're attending it. So I think travel disruptions is the one key issue that we are also trying to have talking points against. the good news is and this is something that I think for the international market, Washington, D.C. has going for it, is we are a stable market. We're serviced by 3 airports, so we can, address the travel concerns by saying, well, you can come into 3. You have the community there with diplomatic communities, so sometimes there's more connections with the embassies to help process visas or address it for some of their delegates. So travel disruptions is the one that I would focus on, but I think there are ways and things that guidance we're giving the clients to help reassure them that 2023 in-person meetings are viable.
And a lot of what you hear Tara talk about today, for those that may or may not have joined the Tourism and Visitor Services webinar, you probably hear very similar challenges with travel disruptions and visa challenges. And I'm sure you've heard Elliot talk about the new CEO of U.S. Travel Association. This is his #1 priority, is trying to reduce reduce wait time and increase the human power that's needed to process these visas in a very quick manner. As for luggage at Heathrow, we'll figure that one out at a different time. Just hope that you're not the victim.
Carry-on luggage, that's what we'll give everybody. Yes. Packing instructions.
I did a good 2 weeks in London on a carry-on. If I can do it, anybody can. So moving on, and we started with optimism. And Vicki had talked a little bit about politics and how politics plays an effect in decision-making for both attendees and planners. And we had a specific survey question around this, and nearly half, 48%, noted that the politics of a host destination impacts a decision for them. This is surprising, not surprising. Especially I can see it definitely playing a dominant role in the planner standpoint, being concerned about safety and security, transportation challenges that might be posed due to street closures, et cetera, for large scale protest. One of the things that we noted, not in the slides presented today, but people had a concern for meeting in destinations where large scale protests happen. Well, welcome to Washington, D.C. But one of the things that we use to counter that is most of those large scale protests are highly organized. They are permitted. We know exactly where they're going to happen, how many people are going to be in town. And we use that as leverage to talk about that meeting with purpose that I highlighted at the top of the hour. And so, Diana, as we look forward to meeting with purpose, what are you seeing firsthand as people are actualizing and meeting in the district in a time where social and economic climate is incredibly powerful and challenging at the same time?
Yeah, definitely. So groups that meet in DC, they understand the opportunity they have here for their attendees to have their voices heard. And they usually have a component of the meeting for their attendees to go to Capitol Hill. So for example, in June, when we had a ton of librarians here for the American Library Association, happened to fall over the Roe v. Wade demonstrations. They were giddy about having their attendees out and being a part of that history. They were more upset about the barbecue battle on Pennsylvania Avenue that might take people away. So things like that, where else can you do that? So they understand. And then we at Destination DC, we're also looking at new concessions that'll help customers talk to our local media and showcase ads or position their social and economic priorities. So things, again, that you probably couldn't do in another city, that it works for them.
Great. And Bill, as you're looking towards the future and working with the team on continuing to book business, laying that long-term foundation as well as short-term action, how are you working with the team to address concerns that exist today, but for, events that might occur in the future?
Yeah, so it reminds me of something my mom and dad used to always talk to me about as it relates to perspective and the lens that you use to look at a certain situation. And so I think here in DC and at Destination DC, I think we take a different approach to the perceived negative impact of politics on our destination. You referenced, some of those larger scale protests. Obviously, there are some that if you watch television, it's like Armageddon. But what you may not realize is that on a day-to-day basis, there are protests happening every day. As you said, they're permitted. We know exactly who they are, where they're going, how long they're going to be. So if we, take the lens of what the TV shows us, yes, it does look like Armageddon. But if you're here, boots on the ground, you really see and have the opportunity to see people freely exercising their First Amendment rights, and not only watch folks exercise their First Amendment rights, but you too also have the opportunity to do the same, which is a right afforded to you in this country. Diana, I think you and the example you used with the Library Association is a perfect one. You can, it is sort of amazing to witness this, and it's one of the things that only happens in Washington D.C. So I think it's a great. I think in some cases that it's a really good thing and something to almost be proud of when done correctly.
Yeah, when done correctly. That's the point. And, we talk often about how DC is a place where you can be a change maker, right? Where you can have your voice heard, where we have literally changed the course of history because of some of those protests that have happened and some of the actionable items that have happened. Actually right here behind us, right? So if you look at Women's March and, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, all of these were catalysts for change for the future. And so Tara, rounding out this sensitive subject with you, where, we waited so long from the global perspective for politics to change, specifically to attract particular meetings into the district. We waited for a change of administration. That happened. And then there's been constant hurdles on the global scale. So what does that politics word mean to you from an international standpoint?
Yeah, the thing I would add for the international viewpoint is just really knowing what politics means globally. Obviously, we're aware of perception issues and Washington, D.C. being the capital, or Washington that's on the global news all the time, and the perception that we are often the city is directly, perception is directly related to the president or the administration, but not just stopping there. I think we have to know what politics means globally and realize that a lot of these issues are global issues, or other countries are having elections that have similar challenges. So just being informed on what's happening here, what's happening locally or nationally, but also in some of these countries, to be able to speak clearly. Communication is king or queen. And we need toolkits, which is what we're working on. Toolkits, talking points, briefing sheets on these hot button issues, just to be informed. And oftentimes what the clients are asking for is just the information to share with their boards or share with their executive leadership, whoever those decision makers are, to ease them on what it is like or how they can communicate if needed, if there are concerns with their attendees. And then just also humanizing the city through its communities, and our team does this on the leisure side with, Washington Now Experience DC, but especially with some of these programs like Connected Community, that DC is a community. So is boycotting a destination really helping and having that dialogue with our clients?
And that's an excellent point on the boycotting, because there's very strong evidence that shows that by boycotting a destination, it has very little impact on the actual legislation that's happening. And so you're actually, the people that are hurting the most as a result of organizers pulling out of a destination are the frontline workers, the people who aren't put to work every day, the people who make minimum wage. Many of the people that work in our industry, whether they're, in hotels or restaurants, venues, transportation, so much of that support system is unfortunately the recipient of some of these boycotts that we're seeing across the country. And you brought up another interesting point that, these aren't things that necessarily always just happen in DC or in the United States. This truly is, a global issue. And Bill, on the domestic side, it's, this is also happening across our country, right? We like to say that DC is the destination where, again, your voice can be heard, but we're seeing these challenges in a lot of our competitive cities. And you see it across the landscape as destinations are often challenged with being perhaps a blue dot in a red state, a blue city in a red state, where, you know, the residents of that individual city may or may not make up the same thought processes on social issues that we all you know, are looking and facing in this day and age. So it's interesting to see how we hopefully are positioning ourselves in that positive light and working through it as opposed to it being very negative. So we've talked a lot about different challenges that we're facing, some optimism again, but I'm curious as to what you're each seeing is the biggest issue that maybe we have or haven't tackled yet. So Diana, from the services perspective, for those groups that are coming in and actualizing, you know, now or in the next year or so, what do you see in terms of business events being the biggest challenge for the future?
Definitely for definite groups, just the attendee booking behaviors and the entire housing landscape. So we're working with customers to help them be proactive and understand the best way to be successful. So whether that's looking at different areas of the city, perhaps not coming in with the largest block that they've done in the past, but remembering their time of year, and you know, maybe you don't want to lowball because it's going to be hard to get room. So we've seen a lot of changes in this kind of landscape right now. So we're working with the housing companies to see what they're seeing across the country with other customers. But it's something that I'm definitely keeping my eye on and helping customers kind of get around and figure out the best way to do that.
And Bill, as you're looking to continue to book business for the future, what are you challenged by?
So I think there are two things that you know, if I'm going to follow Tara, might keep me up at night. Although I don't put the patches on my eyes, but you know, the same exists. The social. You know, there are laws that are being created that, you know, while our attendees may not have had an opportunity to vote on those laws and don't have a voice necessarily in the direction that they go, they do vote with their attendees, and then by default their attendance, and then by default their dollars. And you never know, you know, what decision is going to have that social impact. So we're always, you know, wary of that as we certainly sit in a very polarizing city. So and then the economic decisions, you know, we certainly all are impacted by economies, and obviously we are in an inflationary period right now, but then there's talk of a recession. So as we sort of ride the ebbs and flows of the economy, people are having to make, you know, decisions sort of in their own homes, but that may affect their attendance to conferences. So, and those things are by and large outside of our control. So those would be probably the two things that I would say would have the biggest impact on us in 2020.
And Tara, what's your opinion?
Mine is visas. I think for the near term, even if we're booking the international conferences, which we continue to, the attendance is inhibited by the delegates having access to the country, which relates to being able to get a visa, which in some of those top feeder markets are literally 400 days wait time to schedule a visa interview. So the good news is with Elliott being on the Brand USA board and US Travel doing a lot of these initiatives with talking with stakeholders, you know, it is being addressed. So it's just patience until that gets solved.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, again, on that visa issue, the work that's being done, you know, outside of destination DC is so important. But as Diana had topped us off with, I believe the statistic was 84% is the average participation rate compared to 2019. Much of that has to do with the international marketplace, and much of that has to do with you know, as we continue to, you know, try and gain different market share, you know, medical meetings often do bring in a large international contingency, even if it is an American Association of ... And so while Tara focuses on meetings that rotate globally, so many of the composition of our meetings and events are global just by its nature. And so this isn't just something that affects the World Congress of. The American Association of ... is also affected by these long wait times and challenges that we face. So rounding out the last question, I do want to focus on sustainability and really pose whether this is fad or fact. You know, we are in the United States, certainly not the leaders in this effort. You know, we are so far behind our European counterparts when it comes to environmental sustainability, and especially in business events. Elliot this morning was talking about IMEX and how progressive they are in terms of making sure that there are efforts put forth in this topic of conversation. So as we look at, you know, the commitment to sustainability for the future, 48% of prospective attendees said it's a factor in events that they choose to attend. So almost half say, you know, they want to be responsible moving forward and want to know what measures are being taken at some of the events that they do. So, you know, we're increasingly seeing this in RFPs, but deciphering whether it's just put in because it's, you know, they kind of need to, or whether these are actual measures that are made in decision-making of a destination, it kind of remains to be seen. So Tara, I'm going to kick it off with you because again, on that global scale, sustainability is a number, you know, very top priority, I'll say, you know, perhaps not number one, but very huge. And sustainability for us also includes that legacy component. So I just want to, you know, make that clear as we talk about connected community. So Tara, how are you positioning us as a sustainable destination moving forward?
Yeah, I think because the audiences that we deal with are global, it really, the answer depends on who you ask for the importance of it. So when we're dealing with European attendees or European conference organizers, this is absolutely a deal breaker, and they have to prioritize what is considered a sustainable destination on US standards. You know, there's also global standards for what is sustainable. And so I think by comparison, if you're asking US attendees of a meeting, you know, it might be a nice to have, or they feel better as a responsible delegate doing what they can, but it's not necessarily a requirement for attending or maybe choosing the destination. But what we are seeing is sustainability referenced in RFPs as a decision criteria for one of the things that whoever is making the decision will consider. But what's interesting is they're not necessarily asking for the information about sustainability. And like you mentioned, Melissa, it's not just environmental, it's social impact and legacy, and how are they giving a long-term contribution to a community. And so although they might not directly ask for it, we are as a sales team proactively providing it. And we are also trying to engage our members, whether it's the venues, the hotels, the service providers, in proactively providing the information in what we always hear about snackable or digestible practical ways. And one of the things that we're learning ourselves is it's not just about the stats and the accolades, it's the operations of sustainable or regenerative practices. So more than just environmental, and what is the operation behind it, not just the accolade. And so we definitely address it. And I think as a community, we should all be more proactive in giving that information and not waiting for it to be asked for, because it can help persuade a client to choose BC.
Yeah, absolutely. We learned yesterday on a report out from a Conference Direct webinar recently that sustainability is something that now should just be, you know, a given. They don't want to have to, the planner community doesn't want to have to ask for that data, like you just noted, Tara. It should be a given that we provide it upfront. So Bill, on that domestic front, as we work with the Conference Directs, the Helms Briscoes, you know, the influencers, and then our end user planner community as well, is this a fad or fact on the domestic side, as we, you know, have traditionally not been as responsible as our global counterparts?
Great question, and it sort of puts me into mind as we were asked that question of a statement that the environmental activist Greta Thunberg made when she was addressing the UN. She said that only in the US is it a question. And the rest of the world is there. They're at the table. There's one seat left, and we're waiting for the US to join. But I think the other piece, as I am being educated by so many younger folks, I'm at the age now where I can say young folks, Shelby, we get a lesson from her all the time. And one of the things that I've recently learned from her, that we've kind of always known, that sustainability is more than just recycling and reducing your carbon footprint. Sustainability also speaks to the fact that the dollars generated by a meeting or a group coming into a destination help support a small business, help support sort of initiatives that we enact in our destination that do reduce carbon footprints and the like. So, you know, when you start to sort of take a broader view on sustainability and all that it encompasses, I think it's a bit more digestible. So we talk about a lot in the DDC offices, you know, how the impact of maybe not having so many attachments on your emails, or unplugging appliances that are not in use, really are things that you can do to make an immediate impact. Who would have thought that actually having your meeting and bringing folks to a destination sort of really has a large impact on the people's lives that go about their day-to-day lives in a specific destination.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation about how business events negatively impact the environment or positively, and there's cases being built for both sides, that, you know, the digital footprint versus the actual human footprint may or may not be larger, and so that's something that I think remains to be seen for all of us as we continue to move forward. And Bill had mentioned Shelby Lutzy and Liz Sheridan, both within the Convention Sales and Services Department, lead our sustainability task force within Destination DC. So these two women, along with the other task force members, are educating us daily on what we can do in the business events and leisure world in terms of being more responsible moving forward. So Diana, as we wrap up in the last minute, what are you seeing in terms of practical application from events that are meeting here, whether, you know, big or small?
Yeah, we're actually seeing more planners dipping their toe into planning a sustainable meeting. So we're getting asked a lot of questions about sustainability initiatives in venues, hotels, restaurants, transportation even. So at this point, the request for LEED certified venues is just increased so much. So we've had to start reaching out to venues that meet the meeting size requirements, and then digging a little deeper and asking these venues what their plans are for certifications, and actually sharing with them that it's definitely attainable. They just need to make a few adjustments, and then we connect them over with our friends with US Green Build. And it's not as expensive as people think. It's not as invasive as people think. They might already be 80% down the road to having some kind of LEED certification. So that's something that we've been doing a lot this year.
Right. And US Green Build, who's not just an advocate and an advisor for us, but actually having their annual meeting here in the fall of 2023. So we're actually hoping to be able to do some firsthand tours and so forth of US Green Build, not necessarily for the general public, but for planner audience, to showcase what some of our venues are doing in the case of sustainability moving forward. So, you know, I think this is the topic that we are really here in the US just starting to touch on and really cater a lot of our initiatives and strategies moving forward around the sustainability efforts. So that rounds out our topics and our conversation today. We did not have any questions, so I just continued to plow through with some of what I think is the great conversation that we had today. And I want to first thank our panelists who just wrapped up. Again, Bill Adams, who's our Director of Convention Sales, Diana Waldrop, Director of Convention Services, and Tara Miller, our International Account Director. And of course, I want to thank Vicki Allen, Senior Research Account Manager with MMGY Travel Intelligence, who really helped set us up for success today. We are working towards finishing the last wave, the fourth wave of this data collection from our planner and attendee communities. So I encourage you, probably not in the next convention committee, but perhaps the one right after. We'd like to continue this conversation and round out the year with the final findings and how we've seen the trend line shift or not as we move forward. So of course, I'd like to certainly thank our member community, all of you that joined today and who are always engaged and active within the convention sales and services landscape. You know, you help us do our jobs and showcase the city absolutely beautifully and help us land a lot of the business that we bring forward. So just continue to be great stewards of Washington, D.C. We will do the same. And thank you so much for joining today. We appreciate your support and look forward to a great 2023 ahead. Thank you.